Though you couldn't place it, the man's tattoo looked incredibly familiar. Either you had seen it before, or it was the most powerful case of déjà vu that had ever struck you. The more you thought about it, the more your head screamed in protest. An image exploded into your mind. You recalled a man with obsidian hair giving you a uniform. A symbol embroidered on the shoulder mirrored the design of the sword hanging from his belt. Both the sword and embroidery perfectly matched the tattoo you just found on the dead man. You remembered feeling proud to wear that uniform, proud to truly be a part of something. Your headache flashed again, and the memory faded. You realized you'd never worn a uniform like that. What was going on? You recognized the name Shadowhawks as belonging to an infamous group of criminals. The organization was so powerful, many members didn't bother working undercover. They even wore uniforms, flaunting their crimes, but you also recognized the name Shadowhawk for other reasons. Your head pounded as more unfamiliar memories flashed in your vision. The memories centered around the dead man's tattoo. You saw it forged into a dagger handle. Felt yourself sliding the dagger between someone's ribs. Were you going crazy? Your people had never shied from risk, if it meant great reward. Centuries ago, an expedition tried to find the birthplace of the world, the source of all magic. Somehow they had succeeded and had altered the fate of the world. They'd inherited fantastic powers. Powers that destroyed the continent of Auroria, but also saved the people living there, transporting them to new, safer lands. When any of the adventurers died, their new powers passed their memories to all Auroria survivors. Transferred by blood through generations, most of those memories had begun to fade. But it was said that in some gifted people, they could re-emerge. It could be happening to you. Some of the names of the 12 adventurers, the library expedition, were well known. Everyone had heard of Jean, who'd been transformed into Kyrios, the god of destruction. However, the memories that most often surfaced in Harani belonged to an assassin named Melisara. You hearkened back to the first memory you'd experienced. Through Melisara's eyes, you saw the dark-haired man hand her the uniform. Then offer a boyish grin and say, "Welcome to the Shadowhawks." She glared at him, but forced a smile. It was Jean. Apparently, the heritage of the Shadowhawks went back further than most Harani realized. You studied a map marked with Haman's meeting place and saw a ghostly image of another map. Another memory. As your head ached, you looked out through Melisara's eyes. You saw an elegant queen with cold eyes point at the map. "He's here, in Delphinad," the queen snarled. "If I can't take my pound of flesh from the mother, I'll take it from the son," Melisara said. "Make your peace, Jean Evernight. The hereafter is waiting." Faced with Haman's betrayal, other memories surged forward. You knew Melisara was an elite assassin, but you'd never heard she wanted to kill Jean. Why hadn't she gone through with it? Had she killed him at the beginning, the world might have been spared the god of destruction later. You scoured Melisara's feelings. She'd wanted Jean to suffer, to know the searing burn of betrayal. She'd wanted him to trust her, to play the fool, just as you'd played Haman's fool. He'd given you a free trip off a cliff. As the ground rushed up to meet you, Melisara's fury scorched your heart. Then, darkness. Your village had been attacked, and your entire family had been killed. Haman knew you'd lied about the Crescent and had searched your village for it. The slaughter must have occurred when he failed. Haman was as vicious as a rabid dog. Were all elite Shadowhawks this way? Had Jean been this way? If so, it was no wonder Melisara had wanted to kill him. Shockingly, the next memory showed Jean had been nothing like Haman. You saw Jean rescue a kidnapped girl, protect a barmaid from a drunk's unwelcome demands. Saw him leave a thief bound and gagged on the steps of a city guardhouse. Saw him being moral. A longer memory surfaced. A dining hall crowded with warriors wearing the Shadowhawk uniform. Jean and a tall Firan were laying down the group's rules. They were scoundrels and murderers. They would charge protection money. They would fight if challenged and kill any guards who got in their way. But they would not steal from honest merchants. They would not rape. They would keep the peace for honest, hard-working people, and hunt down anyone who did not live up to this standard, citizen, guard, or noble. Your vision shifted, showing Melisara crying in her quarters. She couldn't imagine killing Jean now, not once she'd seen the just man he was. His mother had killed her family and her beloved father. Jean had had nothing to do with it. It was getting easier to tell which memories belonged to Melisara and which were yours. You had never studied magic with the man who'd become the dread god in the royal library. You'd never laughed at his failed attempts to memorize the names of ancient combat styles. You'd never seen him as just Jean, teasing his lover, Kiprosa, in the Shadowhawk Lodge. Melisara knew she'd have to keep her vow to kill him, but vengeance no longer consumed her heart. However, for you, the path toward the Tiger Spine Mountains was also the path toward your revenge. Jean hadn't been Melisara's only Shadowhawk friend. She was also close with Taiyang, the group's Firan co-leader. He'd helped her sharpen her skills with a bow, and she taught him efficiency with a blade. She'd once tried to scratch his snow lion steed behind the ears and nearly lost a hand. When she'd instinctively growled at the beast, Taiyang had teased she was part Firan. It felt appropriate. You now had your own Firan partner in arms. Bat seemed honest and loyal, closer to the Shadowhawks of old than Haman's gang of killers. Melisara had watched Jean become the god of destruction during the expedition. She hadn't wanted the Shadowhawks to follow that dark path, but somehow it seemed they had. With Bat's guidance, you earned the respect of the Shadowhawks. The early tasks were minor crimes and grunt work, but they soon recognized your skill. You'd heard about the dragon scale your entire life. Now you not only see it in person, but touch it and rescue it. Much like a crown or scepter, the gem symbolized a monarch's right to rule. It had come from Auroria and had traveled through the hands of countless royals over the ages. Rumors had always swirled that royalty employed the Shadowhawks, now you knew they were true. Even in Melisara's time, the group had apparently worked for the rich, poor, and nobility alike. Albeit as vigilantes, not thugs. Salphira was the goddess of fire. She hadn't been reincarnated by any members of the expedition. Her worshippers and realm of influence had been dwindling ever since the exodus from Aurora. It made perfect sense for her priests to make a grab for power by stealing the dragon scale. It was a last grasp at legitimacy. They'd always hated the last queen of the great Harani Empire, and the division of the kingdom after her death. You'd often heard they were plotting to put a king on her throne. If they could maintain possession of the dragon scale, they might have a shot at it. The Shadowhawks cared nothing about who held the dragon scale. It was just a job. What troubled them was the state of their holdings in Mahadevi, where you were currently headed. Other criminal groups were successfully eroding the Shadowhawk authority in the area. Vast sums of money were being lost as more black market deals, assassinations, and the like were shuttled through the Shadowhawks' competitors. No wonder the Shadowhawks had treated you so well. They were desperate for new members. As you snatched the gem from its altar, a feeling of absolute victory swept over you. This would be your crowning glory. The Shadowhawks would have to make you a full-fledged member. Melisara had lived through a moment that should have felt as glorious, but didn't. You saw her kneel before Jean, who had now been reborn as Kyrios, the god of destruction. Years had passed since their time as Shadowhawks and journey to the birthplace of the world. The rage in his face was replaced with joy, and he helped her to her feet, embracing her tightly. She could feel the violent beating of his heart and was overcome with regret and sympathy. She felt no victory as she plunged a dagger of carven bone into the back of her former friend. The Shadowhawks threw you a party to celebrate your new membership in their ranks. The ale, the cheering, the dancing, it overwhelmed your senses. Melisara's memories hit you in a flurry, attacking from every angle at once when your guard faltered. When she'd entered the birthplace of the world, Melisara hadn't become a god like Jean. She had, however, been given certain powers, magnifying her deadly abilities. She forged a dagger that could kill anyone on contact, a dagger of instant death. However, such power needed a source. For the dagger to work, it consumed the soul of the person wielding it. As soon as she stabbed Jean, ending his rampage as the god of destruction, her entire being vanished inside of his. Ideally, the dagger would kill only its intended victim. Once that poor soul was dead, the dagger's magic would no longer be needed, and it would release its power source, the soul of the assassin. The assassin could then go on to kill again. However, Jean, now Kyrios, was no ordinary man. When Melisara stabbed him through the heart, the dagger did its work and absorbed her soul. However, the magic of the dagger was not quite powerful enough to kill the god of destruction. He was the only being on Earth who could have survived it. Though gravely wounded, he lingered. Melisara, meanwhile, was trapped inside of him. Any question she had about his motivations, character, intent, all were immediately answered. She could see the clutter of his very mind. Samyad had been reluctant to share his knowledge with you. When Melisara was absorbed into the body of Kyrios, he no longer had the luxury of reticence. In one instant, she knew him better than his beloved could ever have hoped to. She saw the pain of his childhood, when he and his mother, the king's consort, were banished from the palace by a jealous queen. They'd been relentlessly pursued by Melisara's own father, death a constant threat. She saw the moment his mother slaughtered his half-brother to secure Jean's place on the throne. She saw Jean's resulting rage at his mother's actions. He stormed from the palace and never saw her again. The helm of Kyrios. What could Haman have wanted with such a gruesome relic? When Samyad returned it, you realized Melisara had seen it as well, just before the fall of Aurora. Competing memories raged within you. Melisara, Jean, Kyrios. Jean's life, as Melisara witnessed it, cascaded past. He loved Kyprosa fiercely. After becoming Kyrios, he thought himself totally alone and fell victim to an evil advisor. He began to conquer the continent. A note from Kyprosa had summoned him to the library, but it was an assassination attempt. Though he survived, his heart did not. Convinced his love had betrayed him, he was filled with an evil unlike the world had ever known. He fell completely under the sway of his evil advisor, Anthalon, and committed unspeakable atrocities. He was totally consumed by his powers as the dread god. Though the mad scholar spoke with riddles and giggles, Samyad had sworn he was trustworthy. When he told you the incomplete helm was a potent weapon against worshippers of Kyrios, you believed it. Finally, you could imagine Haman's motives. To use the helm to overtake the Shadowhawks, most of whom worship the dread god. You half expected Janaea to produce a third fragment of the helm, but he did not. It would have made sense. Ostera was the only free port on Harani, trading openly with Nuya. Centuries ago, Queen Pavitra had attempted to conquer the wealthy Solus headlands, mostly to replenish the royal coffers. However, residents of the peninsula liked their freedom and their coin and killed her, ending her conquest. The helm worked as advertised, forcing your Shadowhawk ambushers to flee in pain. When it had first appeared Bart had been disloyal, your sense of betrayal triggered a memory. Melisara had once felt a similar emotion. As Kyrios lingered between life and death, Melisara inside, Taiyang had come to his rescue. The Firan brought him to his lover, Kyprosa, who used her newfound powers to heal him. Violently shoved from his body, Melisara was horrified Kyprosa would let Kyrios live. Every petal on every flower has a reason to exist, Kyprosa said. We cannot let the god of destruction die. The day will come when we will need him. Melisara doubted Kyprosa's words. She felt her friend's eyes were clouded by love. The last thing Melisara had wanted to do was kill Jean. But this creature was no longer Jean. It was Kyrios, and if there was a drop of justice left in the world, Melisara felt he needed to die. But she also knew that the birthplace of the world, a magic garden, hadn't made her a god. Now, unable to catch Kyrios by surprise, she would have no hope of defeating him. As the resurrected god of destruction stalked away from his former friends, boiling with fury at their real transgressions and imagined betrayals, Melisara had no words left with which to express the frustration in her heart. The greatest assassin to tread the earth let out a heart-rending howl of rage. Kyrios returned to his evil advisor, Anthelon, and began his bloody work again. "We all have our secrets," Bart had said. On the road to Villanelle, you pondered his true goals. Melisara had experienced similar doubts about her companions from the expedition. She'd watched them become gods and heroes, reshaping the world as they fought. But in the end, they'd all seen the evil that had consumed their former friend, Jean. When they finally gathered to hatch a plan and stop his rampage, Melisara was the first to volunteer. She knew it would cost her life to stand against the god of destruction. But after so many years of death and sorrow, the assassin cared little for herself. As you rode to meet Bart, you thought of Haman and the trail of blood that had led you here. You heard Melisara's words. We must remember, life is a little thing compared to justice. Haman's men had already found Vincenzio's family and tortured them mercilessly. Clinging to life, Vincenzio's widow told you everything. Vincenzio knew keeping the Crescent from his superiors was a risk akin to betrayal. He smuggled his family into Lutesong to keep them safe from Shadowhawk retaliation. The local villagers sold them out to Haman's men, trading their lives to line his pockets. At the story, more of Melisara's memories unfurled. What Kyrios had never known, but that Melisara had, was that his rage was misplaced. Kyprosa, his beloved, had never betrayed him. The note luring him to that first assassination attempt had been a forgery. Rumors suggested that Ashabel had already been resurrected, no doubt by Anthelon, and that Bart had begun leading his own cadre of Shadowhawk warriors. Time would tell if he led them to glory or tragedy along the path of Melisara or Jean. He and Janaea had, after all, nearly killed you. They both knew more than they'd shared in the tower. Those details might have saved some scars. When Bart summoned you to Silent Forest, you reflected on its history of tragedy and magic. The trees had been watered by the blood of several wars. Tombs of ancient kings who'd lived centuries upon centuries ago dotted the landscape. A terrible mystery was supposedly sealed under Soundless Lake. Rumors even suggested a powerful warlock was searching for other fragments of Kyrios' helm. And all in only the last few centuries since the exodus from Aurora. Bart left you a small bundle. When you opened it, you found an expedition journal. It had once belonged to Vincenzio. His family had given it to Bart. Reading the journal, you finally understood why so many Shadowhawks knew Vincenzio's name. As agents of the Harani royals, the Shadowhawks had been tasked with an important mission. Explore Aurora, homeland of the Harani people, lost so long ago. The expedition leader, Vincenzio, had discovered much more than just a shard of Kyrios' helm. He wrote of many things, both terrible and wonderful, a land of beauty and of mortal peril. But most of all, he wrote of the future, of a time when your people would finally return home. It was as if he was speaking directly to you, tempting you with the call of new adventure. Kyrios and Andanon had taken your people's homeland, forcing you to flee to new continents. While Melisara distracted Kyrios by offering him her very life, the Auroran citizens fled via a magic gate through the hereafter to lands out of his reach. But now, you could help reclaim your lost homeland. You memorized part of the journal. I see a potential paradise, a miraculous place of wonder and renewal, Vincenzio wrote. All of the things I am not. I can't stay here. I am not the person this place was made for. But perhaps you were.